What is up, gamers? It is Styx here, and today I'm recording for the third time a build for the praxic vestment exotic in Destiny 2 Renegades. The exotic is pretty fun, and while it might not be some DPS optimization machine, there are ways you can better maximize its usage to get the most out of its benefits, as well as build it into already existing powerful builds. In this case, of course, you're going to require the praxic vestment. You get it from running the Renegades campaign on Legendary, or from the Cantina. I believe there's a little place on a table where you can get it post-campaign if you've already beaten it. Its effect is praxic lift. You gain an air move jetpack, weapon and arc-powered melee final blows build up jetpack fuel. While airborne, press your air move ability to charge your jetpack, and then on release, you activate your jetpack with a forceful blast of exhausting arc energy, then fly forward a short distance based on the amount charged. Collide with a combatant to unleash a blinding blast of energy and gain a temporary bonus to your melee stat. 90% of you who watch my stuff aren't subscribed, so make sure you subscribe and let me know that you want to see more of this content. We will be combining this with Prismatic Titan. There are two super options here, one I prefer over the other. I'll explain why. We have Glacial Quake or Thunder Crash. I prefer Glacial Quake, especially because right now it is the lawless frontier, meaning that if you are invaded or if you are invading, Glacial Quake is your best friend because you can just give yourself super with one of the healing drones, put down a Vex bubble, and then just get your super and go nuts. Thunder Crash, you can do somewhat simple stuff, but it's also really easy to shoot you out of the air, and in general with this, you lose out on the ability to create stasis shards with some of the abilities we're going to employ, which is really important for wanting to get back some of that melee energy and generate as much melee as possible, because praxic vestment, of course, is built really hard into melee. I'm going to recommend taking the thruster, which gives you a hunter dodge but on Titan, whatever catapult you want, and you require the thunderclap melee. It is the only arc melee, and it is very good for damage with what we're going to be doing here. In fact, it combines extremely well with our glacier grenade, which puts down a bunch of stasis crystals that can be shattered for damage. We're basically going to be having the loop of either using it for cover or throwing it on enemies to then thunderclap them so that while they are frozen by the glacial grenade, they take a ton of damage from the explosion and from the melee itself. For the aspects, we're going to run a Diamond Lance so that you shatter or defeat targets with abilities or stasis weapons to create a stasis lance that you can then pick up and then throw to freeze targets on impact. In addition to that, you can slam it to freeze targets in a small area around the slam. The next aspect being Knockout. Critically wounded a target or breaking their shield infuses your melee attacks with arc energy and increases your melee range and damage for a short time. Defeating targets with your melee attacks makes you amplified and restores a portion of your health. Defeating more powerful combatants increases the amount of health restored. This is just generally nice for keeping you alive out there, especially given that in the new lawless frontier, you cannot heal naturally, so you have to basically heal with your abilities, with your renegade abilities, or with the little wells of light that are on the ground for pickups. For the fragments, we have Facet of Purpose, which is the reason why I recommend Glacial Quake. Picking up an Orb of Power will give you Frost Armor in this case, but it would also give you Bolt Charge for Thunder Crash, which isn't bad at all, it just deprives us of some well-needed damage resistance. This costs some class stat, but it is well worth it. Next is Facet of Command, so that whenever we freeze a target, it reloads our equipped weapons, and whenever we defeat a frozen target, it creates a stasis shard, which is one of the ways we will be getting stasis shards depending on what artifact mods you pick. Next is Facet of Ruin, which increases the size and damage of the burst when you shatter a stasis crystal or a frozen target, and increases our weapon stat, which is always nice. Then Facet of Protection, so while surrounded by combatants, this will be really useful when you are using the praxic vestment because enemies love to fire at you while you're trying to fly around in the air. You are more resistant to incoming damage, and then while transcendent, this effect is increased. It also gives you a +10 melee, which is very welcome on this setup. Facet of Dawn immediately takes that melee away by having a -10, but also causes powered melee hits against targets to make you radiant, and powered melee final blows to make you and nearby allies radiant. Very useful, especially for building up anti-champion if you don't already have a setup you want to use that with. For the stats, I'm going to recommend going into melee at least 140. This is because you can make up for it with praxic vestment and some fonts. I'm hovering around 155 just in case. Just in case, so I can just have up to 200 or even beyond it as much as possible. My next priority is super. Super is always a really good stat. I don't think I need to explain too much on that one. Getting it faster, having it do more damage, always useful. And then either weapons or class. In this case, the armor wanted weapons, and so I went with weapons. Beyond that, it is preference. Here are my armor mods. I'm going to briefly go over the ones that I think stand out. We have hands-on, which I think is completely necessary on the helmet, as well as special ammo finder because of the kinetic special weapon we're using. Spoiler alert, it's the lightsaber. For the arms, I recommend 1 to 2 melee fonts with a heavy-handed mod. If you only use 1 melee font, use 2 heavy-handed mods. It creates orbs when you get melee final blows, which is really nice for you and your friends. On the chest piece, run whatever damage resist you want, and then on the legs, I'm running a weapon font with Absolution and Invigoration. This makes it very nice for me to generate my abilities from orbs, as well as to deal some extra damage with all of my weapons. Then the mark, which combines really well with our thruster setup. I run a class font because unfortunately my class stat is extremely low, and then I run Powerful Attraction to pull in things like orbs and crests when I am using my thruster. Really useful if you're an invader, by the way, just a nice little point of convenience. And then Reaper, so that whenever I use my thruster, my next weapon kill generates an orb of power. Now, for artifact mods, I recommend Impact, Shock, and Gravity as a nice little option for Kinetic Arc Siphon, especially if you're using a praxic blade with any kind of arc weapon like the new hand cannon. It's really nice. I recommend Voltaic Charge, so that while you have an arc super equipped, you can have an extra stack of armor charge. Really useful for just holding onto that for as long as you possibly can. And then the option that I mentioned where you really want the Glacial Quake with this is if you don't want the Impact, Shock, Gravity, or if you don't want the Voltaic Charge for whatever reason, Elemental Siphon is really good here because rapid final blows with a kinetic weapon or a weapon matching your equipped super creates an elemental pickup that matches your equipped super, which this is mostly going to be referring to the praxic blade in our case because, as I'm sure many of you are aware, some of the praxic blade upgrades change its damage type to match your super during certain attacks, which means no matter what, it will always benefit from Elemental Siphon. In the next row, I'm going to recommend 3 possible options. Kinetic Synthesis is really nice for Praxic Blade because you just get extra ammo for it, and then Riposte is also nice in the sense that when you guard with a sword, your light and heavy attacks will then stun unshielded combatants. It's strong against unstoppable champions. This is for more of a heavy ammo sword kind of deal because of the way that the Praxic Blade interacts with barrier champions, kind of removes the unstop already unless you run specific setups with it. In which case, if anyone on your team from yourself on one of your weapons or anything like that is running Weaken, I recommend Power from Pain because Devour is pretty nice on this setup. In the 4th slot, I recommend running Combination Argent Blade so that you can briefly pause after executing a light attack, then follow it up with a light or heavy to empower your sword for a short time, which boosts its damage and charge rate, which is really nice. Dielectric if you have ways to put down arc debuffs, extra orbs, extra healing. Singularity Blade to further the Weaken if you have ways to apply it, or Counter Energy to gain ability energy whenever champions are stunned. The 5th slot is much more simple. You're going to want Kinetic Rupture so that kinetic weapon damage against a powerful combatant has a chance to create a Kinetic Rupture. Targeting the Rupture can create an explosion that staggers unstops. Combine this with Sword Storm combo so that when you perform 3 light attacks followed by a heavy, it summons penumbral blades that surround you and damage and disorient combatants. Sword final blows then extend the duration of these penumbral blades. Now that we've got most of the stuff out, I've already spoiled half of it anyway, but I'm going to recommend the Praxic Blade. Personally, my setup is the defensive form, but I could also see the balance being pretty useful in this setup. It's just that defensive has a nice little spot in my personal usage. I run it with Hyperblade so that reflecting shots gives me amplified, as well as an eager edge effect on the sword. It's really fun having 2 eager edge swords, as well as the Refraction Core so that reflection damage from this weapon applies an elemental effect that matches your equipped super. In this case, it will slow targets because of my Glacial Quake. If I were to be using Arc, it would instead grant Bolt Charge. If you want to use it less for blocking and more for outright attacking, you could use the Impact Core, which then just causes the same effect to apply whenever you are doing standard melee damage with it. For my energy weapon, I'm choosing an Uncivil Discourse with Outlaw and Jolting Feedback so that I can inflict Jolt on a target, which makes me have dielectric value. And I have the other half with Eager Edge for mobility reasons. If I want to run something for champions, I would recommend an Aurora Dawn with something that's not Tireless Blade realistically, and cold steel. That way I can apply both slow and the unstop with this sword, and then barrier with my praxic blade. Either way, I hope you guys enjoyed the build. If you watched up to this point, then comment down below treats for pumpkin. Thank you guys for watching, and have a great day.